Hi everyone, we are back with another episode of Crafty Sosa. Now, today our topic is a little slightly left field to what we traditionally talk about on this show, but we often talk about how talent acquisition has a seat and should have a seat at the table. Now, that also includes getting candidate experience right, and yet, even in 2024, with the advancement of technology and artificial intelligence, we still tend to struggle to get the basics of human interaction and connections right. Now, today I brought someone on who has gone from being in the TSC to actually being a candidate herself. We've got the amazing Martha Creedon joining us to talk about how we can actually put ourselves in the candidate shoes, which can ultimately help our community do a lot more better. So let's get into it. Let's get crafty. Martha, welcome. And thank you so much for joining us on the
Oh,
podcast today.
thanks so much for having me, Denise. I'm a big listener of all your podcasts. So yeah, love the topics and yeah, really excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining once again. Now, Martha, before we get into our chat, quick intro for our listeners. Who's Martha outside of work and what makes you tick in TA?
Thanks, Denise. So at home, I guess I'm chief taskmaster, mom of two young girls that keep me extremely busy and accountable for lots of their demands. So that keeps me pretty busy outside of work. And obviously, married to my husband Dane. We just live down by the beach, just down the peninsula in Melbourne. So yeah, spend us at the beach quite a lot. Going for walks and yeah, just keeping those two entertained.
That's amazing. You must be such a cool role model, right? And also living next to the beach, that must be perfect, especially for Melbourne summers.
Yeah, it's good. I always think, obviously, I'm originally from Ireland, so being so far away from home, I think it's important that I have that Aussie lifestyle. So yeah, we
Yeah,
love it down here.
yeah, awesome. So, Martha, obviously coming on to the topic around candidate experience, you and I have been talking back and forth. We've
Yeah.
been texting each other. We've been just having, chats, venting, ranting, just about in general. And, I've been a candidate myself after my role was impacted. Your role was recently impacted as well. Let's sort of talk about what your experience has been so far in terms of applying for roles or interviewing. Are you happy to share the good, the bad, the ugly with us in terms of your experience, please?
Yeah, of course. So I think for those who don't know me, I guess my experience is, very much dominant within the technology sector. The thing that I guess really attracted me to tech was that it is that technology. It's so disruptive and it's changing our lives every day. So it's always growing. So I always felt there's always a demand for technology and software. So I think what's happened in the industry has definitely, I think, shocked quite a lot of us with the
Mhm.
tech downturn. So I guess from a candidate experience perspective, my biggest challenge I've been looking for maybe the last kind of 6 to 8 weeks is they just aren't the roles there. So I can't really call out like a very negative candidate experience. I can see that there's not a lot of those opportunities that are right for me. There's a handful that I'm having some conversations with, which is really good. I can see a lot of other recruiters in tech have been impacted. But what I'd also question is that I think there are probably some of us candidates maybe applying for roles that we're probably not suitable for, maybe don't have that expertise. And then I think that's really tough for a lot of recruiters who, obviously really need to work as well and, pay bills, but, they're probably not getting, the traction that they would think that they would get. And there's obviously, so much competition in the market now
Mm.
for those roles.
It's interesting that you say that around, you know, sometimes applying for roles where you don't have all the skills. And I think this is a big conversation I know I've been having with a few people in the TA community around transferable skills and how
Yeah.
we can actually apply that. Um, how do you think we can do better in terms of from an experience perspective for those people that may not have everything, or that I know for
Yeah.
a fact that sometimes I apply for roles and I feel like, oh my god, okay, I've got 90% of this, I should at least get a call, and that doesn't happen.
Yeah, yeah, I know. And the thing is, I think it's the look of the draw of who's looking at your resume.
Mm.
So you could have, a very junior person who's been given a prescriptive list, and they may not have that experience or even that market knowledge of understanding those organizations and the similarities. You could have nobody looking at your resume. You can be in the deep, dark hole of an ATS that no one's ever going to see it. So, I think a lot of people are doing that extra mile. They are connecting. They're looking at a recommendation in there. They're connecting with them on LinkedIn. But not everyone is responding to that. And I also think, that some people are really struggling, and I empathize so much, with our market. It's really sad to see it. But I also think, like we need to make ourselves accountable in how we
Mm,
manage our candidate experience. But it's probably pretty challenging for some of the recruiters on the other side too, who are, probably they've downsized their team. They've got a lot more responsibilities, a lot more pressure. Like they might be worried about their own jobs. And, I think a lot of our industry is very overwhelmed right now, and the amount of resumes and
yeah,
managing that. So, I just think there's no real answer right now, because I think there's, some roles are getting, 300 applications, and it's like, how do you, it's so hard to shortlist when you're getting that many candidates. So I think I'm seeing a lot of traction with referrals. So the opportunities I've been approached for have purely come from my network. They're not actually
nice.
advertised. So I think that's what the advice I would give is really focus on your network and referrals to those roles, because I think it's really hard to stand out at the moment.
Yeah. I was writing down a couple of things while you were saying one thing about you said where obviously, TA teams have become a lot more leaner. And that also means that
Yeah,
there could be possibly junior TA people focusing on roles that they've never had to recruit before.
yeah,
And it kind of reminds me of this LinkedIn Live I did with a friend of mine, I think almost a month ago, and we were talking about understanding personas
yeah,
and the importance a persona plays in when you go out and start hiring for those people, right?
yes,
Let's say there are people who are not technically aligned to a role and they're given a role and then they're kind of like, okay, go Google, chat GPT, what it means and figure out your way from there. And I think that also is kind of a disservice to them in terms of, understanding what that role is and what exactly it is that you're also looking for. So to know the persona as well is equally
mm,
important to give someone that sort of candidate experience. You mentioned about 300 applications, and you're right. For one TA role, you'll see tons of people applying. And again, I go back to that LinkedIn number. It's very, very dodgy, very deceptive.
yeah, yeah,
However, and this is where AI and automation can play a really big part in how we streamline our workflows.
mm,
So and you're right. And I guess it comes down to the fact that anyone that comes through the door, if it's a network or a referral, you should be calling them up, having an introductory chat. Again, it's not about just the now, it's about what's going to happen in the next 3, 6, 9 months. It's about creating a connection.
yeah,
um, and like we always say in TA, right, just give people an update, even if it's nothing.
yeah,
Understandably, if you've got lots of applications, you haven't spoken to them. I hate to say this, but yes, we do have a lot of stuff on our plate and we can't always go back to people. But if we've made the time to speak to them and, vice versa, we should be going back to them with something versus the people that we haven't spoken to.
yeah,
So, let's sort of, I know, Martha, you're a big advocate for sourcing
yeah,
with your varied background, in TA. And I love seeing, people at your level really be an ambassador for talent sourcing. As you know, I'm really passionate about that myself.
yeah,
In your experience from a candidate side, or even in your own experience as a manager,
yeah,
when you reach out to passive candidates,
yeah,
obviously candidate experience can make or break your process. Ultimately, it impacts your brand, it impacts your hiring efforts.
yeah.
How do you think, from a passive market or a talent sourcing perspective, how can talent sourcing impact the initial candidate experience?
Yeah, I think there's excuse me, so many aspects to it. So for example, one P like I guess from a sourcing perspective, I'll just kind of maybe make this as a statement. Like I'm very passionate about sourcing and the TA partner being side by side. So, the
Mhm.
sourcer, or the talent scout, how I've called in the past, is actually really was that expert from a market insights, talent insights, candidates, talent pool. So they're actually going in and really coaching the manager around, the hiring brief and the hiring criteria. So I think a candidate experience starts from that process, because if you as a sourcer, excuse me, do not have a clear understanding of the success profile, the hiring criteria of this role, like what's going to make this person successful, and quite often the hiring manager does not even know this, so it really elongates the process.
Mm.
and can waste a lot of time for the candidate. So if you're approaching someone who's passive and you don't really have a good understanding of even what the hiring manager is looking for, and they're investing time into that process, and you're bringing them in, and then it all ends up with just a big waste of time.
Yeah.
I think that, from what I know about what candidates tell me, that really frustrates candidates when they get that sense they don't know what they're looking for, and they've already invested a lot of time. Another thing that kind of frustrates me a little bit in some organizations where they see sourcing as a junior, like a screening job.
Yeah.
And that to me, that really impacts the candidate experience, because what they often do is, you're spending 2 weeks sourcing as a sourcer. You have very high level conversations with the candidate, not going deep enough. Then it goes to a recruiter, and then maybe a week later it might go to the hiring manager. So if you are a top performer, just say you're a principal engineer or you're an enterprise account manager, you're not even looking for a role, and
Mm.
then you're investing this time, and it's 2 interviews before you even get to talk to the hiring manager. That's going to make you probably opt out to the process. So that's why I think it's so important to get the model right and really have the talent sourcer, and also like accountable, that they understand the business, they know the pitch, they know the interview process. Because there's nothing, I think, worse that when if you have a sourcer talking to a candidate and they're not able to advise that candidate about what that interview process looks like. It's not fair, I think, on the sourcer either. So I think it's just really, really important to have that autonomy for the sourcer, and that they've got that credibility when they go out to market as well.
You touched on something that I talk about and I think about quite often. And the first thing that came to mind was obviously around the candidate experience with from a sourcing perspective. And I'm of the mindset, and I'll actually put this question out to you.
Yeah.
I personally believe that if a candidate is passive and they're still not fully invested into your process, but still want to know more, and you kind of take them through your process, I feel like sourced candidates should be not treated differently, but given a bit more TLC. Because what I
Oh
mean
yeah,
by that
definitely.
is the hiring managers still need to do a lot more sell for that role versus a direct applicant who's already invested in the process from day dot. So that's one first. What do you think? What's your thoughts around that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think that's the role of the recruiter, TA, partner, sort whatever you want to call it, is that's our job. Like, we're soft skill people. Like, understand, get to the hearts and minds of that candidate.
Mm.
So if it's a passive candidate, and they're really not sold on this, or they've got a concern of this, like, we need to, educate the hiring manager, and really make sure that they're given that, like, warm and fuzzy experience. And, like, arguably you should do that with everybody, but you need to be able to share with your hiring team, like, what are the motivators, what are the drivers, what are the risks with this candidate.
Mhm.
You need to expedite the top talent, because sometimes it's the right time for that person. They may have got a new manager, for example, and that it's really not working, and they are motivated to leave, or whatever the catalyst is for them to be looking.
Mm.
And you can be a passive candidate, but then when word gets out that you are not happy where you are, it's not long before you have other opportunities too. So, in my experience, I'll give you, if I Splunk is probably a good example of that, because the velocity that we recruited was very, very fast. There was high impact to the business, a high growth organization. So there were many roles and senior roles that we would have filled in a week. My leader, Go, was just what I loved about him. So many different things that he taught me, but he had this, I guess, view on sourcing. It was that it was 0 day to hire. So I was like,
Mm.
okay, that's what we should strive to, hire in 0 days. But what that meant is we put a real focus on building pipeline, connecting that
Mm.
pipeline with the business. We always knew what was coming up. I always knew, like, what was happening in the business, what was going to be coming. So then, when by the time you got that rec approved, you had the candidate, and then that was going to provide so much impact to the business,
Mm.
because loss of income from either professional services, or if it's a sales role or engineering. Um, so I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, no, it does.
yeah.
Sorry, I was just reading some of the notes that I'd taken down while you wrote. It absolutely does, and I love what y'all did at Splunk, because that shows that y'all really did value the fact that nurturing, nourishing those relationships are
Yeah,
very, very important to get you all ahead in terms of how you'll hire and how quick you'll hire as well.
yeah,
And one thing that comes to mind, Martha, while you were speaking is candidate experience is and candidate care is probably that one element in the TA life cycle that never should stop. From the minute that you reach out
yeah,
to a candidate till they're actually onboarded, that consistency should never stop,
yeah.
right? And we should never drop the ball on that. And unfortunately, it tends to happen. I'll give you an example. A couple of
Yeah.
years ago, I got approached by a recruiter at Meta actually for a role in Singapore. So I was poached for the
Mm.
role. I didn't apply for it. I went through all the rounds of interviews, got through to the final round. I didn't get it, and I got an automated rejected email. And I was
Yeah.
like, hold on. So y'all approach me. I've gone through all the rounds of interviews. At least, you know, y'all should have the decency to give me some proper feedback. I knew I didn't do the best, but however, I'd love to hear from y'all.
Yeah.
But I never heard anything. And I was like, that's really poor candidate experience. And I think for us in
Yeah.
VA, it's also such a learning curve. Like for myself, ever since my role was impacted last year, and then obviously I was applying, I was seeing things on the flip side that I, as a recruiter, as a sourcer, do not want to do. And in fact, I've become a lot more pedantic about the fact that candidate experience, candidate care has to be equally important as everything else is in your life cycle of hiring.
Yeah, 100%, definitely. And I think just that transparency for me is really important. And I kind of practice this as myself as I'm a leader, but I'm also a recruiter. Like I'm always recruiting and I love it. Is just be honest. So, when you're having that TA screen or interview, whatever you want to call it, and it's not a good fit for whatever reason, just tell the candidate, like they will appreciate it as long as it's a genuine reason and
Mm,
not bias. But if it's something specific, what I've always done is been really clear to why I don't think it's going to be the right fit,
mm,
and explain, get their feedback on that, and then provide some suggestions.
mm,
Because quite often it might be like a lack of I don't know, experience or capability that they can go out and build that and come back again.
yeah,
And then I did have that, with people that we had interviewed in the past and were successful, but then they gained some more relevant experience, and then we did hire them.
yeah,
And they'll thank you for that, and they'll talk highly, excuse me, of you to other people as well.
yeah.
Just getting that, like, positive humanistic experience in the process.
It's a ripple effect, right?
Yeah,
So you you do good, people talk about it. You do bad, people talk about it more.
yeah, exactly. We all
So
know that
it's
stat, don't
yeah,
we?
exactly. One of the things that you were also saying, and I made a note about this because it really drives me nuts, is the fact that yes, there should be an equal footing around a sourcer and a recruiter's role
Yeah,
together as a team. They should be going in for the discovery session, intake meeting with the hiring manager at the same time. Sourcer should not be brought in 2 weeks later after the recruiter feels like, oh my
I
God,
know.
I've done too much and I can't find anyone. Or we've engaged with an agency, they haven't done anything. Use the sourcer from the get go because they are the ones who are going to be going out doing that consistent storytelling. So they're going to be asking all the right questions, all the hard questions that probably the recruiter may not ask because y'all's roles are slightly more different in terms of how you'll sell the TVP, EVP, CVP, and all
Yeah.
the P's in there. So,
Yeah, I
all
love it.
right. Um, Martha, let's talk in your experience as a manager, as a candidate. What parts of the recruitment process do you think we should be automating
Mm.
to give candidates a much better experience?
Yeah, that's a good one. And I guess what I will probably share is through my experience, because I'm really mindful that, if you're recruiting, for example, 500 retail staff a year, that's going to be more heavily automated and high volume. So my experience has always been, obviously search, niche in tech. So I think I don't know about auto, like I don't know if auto, like probably needed some kind of tooling, but I think we need to do something to solve for feedback to candidates. And I think everyone knows it's best practice to provide that feedback. And I always see interviews as an opportunity for a candidate to learn, and a
Mm,
development opportunity for them. When they're investing that time, it's really important for me to actually provide feedback to them. But I'm just going to be honest, like it is very hard for recruiters to get good feedback.
Mm,
from hiring managers, and then depends on the confidence level and the seniority of that recruiter in able to get that.
mm,
And so I think, like, is it that we need to, I don't know, provide like, if they're not getting the feedback, is there like a tooling that we need to use, or how can we automate that process where it's really, really easy for interviewers to give feedback? And I remember at my time at Splunk, we did develop a tool, but nobody, when I joined in Australia, none of the interviewers would do it. And it was just such a, I would say it was a hustle. Like, it was very challenging, but
yeah.
I got it to that point that everybody did do it. And that made a huge impact in bias,
Mm,
especially gender bias, in the, the candidate experience, in looking at the, the, I guess, the gaps of the candidate, and then say, okay, well, these are the gaps. Let's work on this on their career development plan when they join.
mm.
So I think there's so much to gain from providing good feedback. You'll also differentiate your brand from a candidate perspective, but I don't think it's working, to be honest, in this industry. I don't think people are even getting emails to be told that they're not successful, never mind being given data-driven feedback. But I think that's so important. That's not what our role should be as recruiters. And it shocks me that there's some companies out there, one very large tech company, as a policy, will not provide feedback to candidates.
I
Which
think that is
I think it
absurd.
really, yeah, it annoys me, to be honest, because I think we need to respect candidates and respect their time they
Absolutely.
invest in the process.
Absolutely. I actually had someone that I was working with, and as a hiring manager, they said to me, so it was my first time working with them, and I said, hey, you've interviewed this candidate. Can I get some feedback so I can go back to the candidate, whether we're progressing or whatever that looks like? And they were very hesitant to give feedback, but I was like, no. I was like, this person's come through the process, they've met every person that they need to meet, so we have to respect their time in this and the effort they put in.
Yeah,
And when they gave feedback, which was obviously a no, and I went back to the candidate, I always ask the candidate what were their thoughts on the feedback and what is their feedback about the process, because let's face it, sometimes hiring managers don't do very well in the interview process themselves, to the
yeah,
point where they make it a lot more uncomfortable for the candidate during the process, which is where there can also be that disconnect very early on in the interview. And I
yeah,
went back and I gave the candidate that feedback, got some feedback, went back to the hiring manager. I said, hey, just as an FYI, had a chat with the candidate, all good. However, this is something that they also mentioned. Maybe, we need to be a little more mindful about, how we're approaching the question, etc. And the first thing they said to me is, this is exactly why I don't like giving feedback.
mm,
He's like, because they always take it the wrong way. And I said, no, no. I was like, look, our duty is to give feedback. How candidates sometimes take it, it's not on us. We don't have control over how they think or how they take that feedback, but
yeah,
we need to do our due diligence, and our duty is to give them that feedback.
yeah,
Um, so it's really, what it's very interesting that you said that there are companies that are still refusing to give feedback, because it's a two-way street. Like, how can you expect
yeah.
someone to come and want to work for you when you're not even ready to invest time in what's an initial start of the process?
Yeah, yeah, I find it baffling because I feel that that's a core part of a recruiter's role, is to provide feedback.
Mm,
It's communication, isn't it? It's core of what our role is, and providing that feedback to the hiring manager as well around, the candidate's feedback is, it's just a feedback loop is just so crucial in
mm,
recruiting. So,
mm.
yeah,
Yeah. One thing we did at Zendesk, I was working with this hiring manager, and I actually do miss working with her. She was really great at giving feedback. But because our hiring panel was very geographically dispersed, so we had people in the US, we had people in Canada, and then we had people in Australia. So we obviously wanted to make sure that the experience for everyone, including the candidate, was good. So we said, all right, instead of using Workday and giving feedback, we'll put feedback in there. However, let's make, because it's asynchronous, we're going to use Slack for that, and we did it through video. So every interviewer
mm,
had to give it through video into Slack, 24
awesome.
within 24 hours. And what was very interesting to see was we had to trust the fact that nobody watched the video before they uploaded their own, and
Yes,
biasness didn't creep in. But what we saw was the hiring manager was very, very happy with how everything was done. Like, it just seemed to work really, really well. And we always came to a decision a lot more earlier on than just written feedback and then sort of going back and forth and asking people questions and why you want the fence or whatever that is. There was no sort of in between. It had to be a yes or no. And if it was a yes, why? If it was a no, why? And that was it.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
and you and I spoke about this. Hiring manager experience is equally important as candidate experience, right? So,
Yeah, 100%. And I think as well, like technology is great, but it's a tool. So it needs to be the
mm,
behavioral
mm,
change. We had a similar tool that we built at Splunk called 2020, and that was an online form. So it was, automatically generated. It was so easy for them to complete it. But it's about the job I see as the recruiter to really educate the hiring teams and stuff like that, because quite often there's people in the interview process who are not they are not emotionally tied to the role. They might just be like a tech lead or whatever it is, and they are giving up their time to do it. So
mhm.
I always like, we want to empower and make hiring managers accountable to bring those teams together. But sometimes I think we really need to facilitate that to make sure whoever's in that panel and process, they understand, okay, these are the capabilities we want you to assess. This is, this is what's really important for the role.
Yeah,
Because it just, like, let's be honest, doesn't happen when you don't facilitate that quite often. So I think that's really important to, that everyone's aligned who's in that process.
yeah.
And once they're aligned and engaged, they're more motivated to give you the feedback rather than, someone on Slack who they don't know
Mm,
hassling them to put that feedback in.
mm, mm.
So that's what I think, really kind of focusing on that kind of behaviors and
Yeah.
alignment works well.
Thank you for sharing that, Martha. Reflecting on your own journey, what's like one piece of advice you'd give to TA folks who are in the seat to actually drive those exceptional candidate experiences? Any one advice?
I think it's really, really know your business.
Mm,
Because I think the more you know your business, the more you can also influence your hiring managers and those teams as well. So I think that's really, really important. And then, like, once you really understand your business, you understand what's required, what will work, what won't work, and you're able to really invest your time in focusing on the right talent, the right people, and provide them a good candidate experience.
yeah.
Like, recruitment's really hard. We've been doing it. It's not an easy gig, but so
Mm,
be kind to yourself. Like, don't bring 20 candidates into the process. Really, focus on what you need, and the only way you can do that is if you really, really understand your business and you have those relationships. So that's my advice: is really put the time in to invest into your business. Go to the stand-ups, understand what's happening in them, understanding who their customers are, and I think you will just, I think, organically then be focusing on the right people and providing them with the right information and knowledge to provide them a good candidate experience.
I love that. And it's so simple. You're right. Know your business. The minute you actually spend time, whether it's your engineering team, product team, you automatically build that trust and you become the go to person for a lot of other things, not
Yeah,
just recruiting as well. Um,
exactly.
I I would also just add on top of that is, obviously ask the right questions around, what is your team value prop? Iterate. If it's not
Yeah,
working, refine, move, pivot where you need to go to, and don't just stick on something just because you think that's what the hiring manager wants or needs. You're
yeah,
there to influence an outcome. So make sure you use your best judgment and your experience in that as well.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
Martha, this has been a pleasure. And I think you and I both can actually just keep ranting
Yeah,
and
I know we
talking and
could.
discussing this, whether it's sourcing, whether it's candidate experience. But look, I know you are on the hunt right now. So good luck with everything. I'm
Thank you.
sure I will see an update hopefully soon. Fingers crossed.
Yeah,
Fingers crossed for you. But thank you so much for coming on the Crafty Saucer. And I wish you all the best with everything.
awesome. Thanks so much for having me, Denise. Have a
No
great
worries.
day.
Take care, everyone, and stay crafty. Bye.